As I was studying Bitcoin, then I was studying the money and the history of money, and then that led to the Austrian economics. That led to low time preference. You fast forward 2 years, and now I think about sleep, reducing alcohol, but diet, meditation, just all my whole view on things has changed on a very, very personal level. And I think there'll be a very profound shift for the better as individuals go back to a lower time preference.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Scott Lindberg to the podcast. Scott is co-owner of Free Market Kids and Bitcoin Homeschoolers. He's also on the board of a nonprofit, Operation Bitcoin. Welcome to the Bitcoin Age, Scott.
Hey, Paulo. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Well, it's great to chat with you. Before we get to Bitcoin, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm from the U.S. I'm a Midwest guy. Started my career actually in the Army. I'd gone to West Point and then served 5 years. I went to business school because I thought I was going to go be a management consultant, and I ended up meeting Tali there. She was a year behind me, and she was pursuing investment banking, and she was a year behind me, and we ended up doing neither of those things. So we started to have a family, and with our firstborn, she wanted to homeschool, and we had a discussion, and we just said, let's do what it takes to have a single income family, and let's just see if we can make it work. And after that, I was basically in operational roles in the fiat world, and she was working 24/7 without a paycheck, trying to take care of the four kids. So that was up until about 2020. And 2020, all the four kids were done with the equivalent of high school. She had gotten all four kids all the way through the homeschooling venture, and I did not like the type of roles that I was in corporate America. I just never felt like I really fit. And now with the Bitcoin lens, I can look back on it and I can see why. And Tali challenged me. She's like, okay, well, we have a choice to make. Do we want to continue to go down this path of doing things we don't like, work for people that doing things that we don't really feel passionate about? Or do we do what we've been telling the kids? And that is, let's go do this. If you can do anything, you can literally do anything, go start a business. Well, they're only going to believe us if we actually go and do it. And that is when, the same time that I had started to study Bitcoin, and you put all those things together, it's kind of this mix. But one of the things we wanted to teach the kids, obviously, was money. And when I was studying Bitcoin, I put those ideas into a board game to try to help, one, because I like games, but it also helps with education. And so that's what we decided to do. We said, let's do Free Market Kids full time. And that was 2 years ago. And it's been a wild ride since.
Well, I definitely want to hear about the game. Before we get there, how did you find Bitcoin and what led you to start going down the rabbit hole?
The start of it, the genesis for me was I was in that fiat job and I wasn't using anything from business school. And so, well, I should at least pretend that I have an MBA. So I was listening to different podcasts. One of those was the Investor Podcast with Preston. And he started to have they would have these quarterly reviews, and it was something that they were starting to touch on. He's saying, hey guys, is anybody else studying this Bitcoin thing? And eventually they had on guests. And I think one of the first ones was someone like Jeff Booth. It may have been Lynn Alden. I forget who the first few were. That led to books. The Price of Tomorrow actually was the book that really jarred me awake. And from there, I started to look for more information. And then I just fell into this. I became a podcast junkie for Bitcoin material. I was looking for all the books I could possibly get, trying to figure out how to. I just kind of went deep on it. That was before Tali did. She still had stuff going on with the kids in schooling, so she's looking at me like, okay, you go do your thing. But my beginning, that's where it started. And I didn't have anybody else to talk to. I didn't know any other Bitcoiners. So the only way I could learn was through these other means. So listening on a conversation with people on a podcast, get a book, maybe there's some videos. And I'm very grateful now because we have a lot of friends in the Bitcoin space. But for the first part of the journey, it was kind of lonely. Anybody I brought it up to didn't know what the heck it was, and certainly couldn't help me get to the next step. But that's where it started.
So it really kind of started because you weren't enjoying your job so much and you were looking for a technology possibly to make money at first?
I wasn't even looking for to make money. I just enjoy learning. Tali and I, we share that trait. We just love to learn. So the house is always filled with books, and she with the kids was always going to the library. We have a whole portfolio of Audible books as well. So we just enjoy learning. It wasn't because I was looking for technology, and it wasn't because I was looking for an investment. It was just interesting. And then as I got more into it, and I was like, wow, this is like some really strange stuff. It wasn't until much later that Austrian economics and time preference and a lot of these other things that are so popular in Bitcoin circles, those didn't come until later. At first, it was just something new, and it was pretty wild and pretty interesting. And then when I got into it, I realized it was even more wild than I could ever imagine. It was stranger than fiction, and it was just mind blowing. And I just couldn't get enough.
So, how did you eventually orange pill Tally?
So that's also part of the journey. Is I like games, and I go to a game conference every year with my brother. We do it just for fun. We grew up with games. There's the whole fellowship side of being together with people of multiple generations, multiple physical abilities. Doesn't matter your gender, doesn't matter your politics. You sit down, you can be together. So think of like Thanksgiving, and you could just play a game. And because we're homeschooling, I was looking at games as a potential tool to help teach kids different concepts as well. So we were looking at things like cash flow and other games to help teach money. And it just seemed to me, here's this Bitcoin thing that I don't understand. And it is, when I started reading, I read after Price and Tomorrow, I went to Inventing Bitcoin. And I was like, I couldn't get my head around it. It was just so weird. I mean, I'm an engineer by undergrad, and I was like, what the heck is this? Now, this is going to make some great game mechanics. Like doesn't anybody have a game yet on this thing? And so it just kind of fit my personality to make it. What that led to was basically this 2-year process of I would study something, I would try to take that, make it into a game mechanic, and I had dice and I had tiles and I had cards. I tried so many different things. And then I would go to family members primarily and try to show them and get them to play, including Tali. But I'd go to my brother, the kids, and they were just listening to me say, okay, what rules are we playing by? What are we testing on this? And then they would ask a question. So, for example, can you send to yourself? And I was like, I don't know. So I'd have to go do research, and all of a sudden I find out, oh yeah, you get change every time you do a transaction, and then you also could do coin joins, and so I'm like, okay, yeah, you can do that. And then there'd be another question, and I go back, and it was just this iterative process. So I was learning while I was building the game. But getting back to your question about Tali, so Tali was focused on the kids and the dogs and the activities and all the other things that go into a homeschooling house, and she just didn't have time for this little project that I was working on. But once the game was done and she could see we were playing with the transactions, and here's the halving and here's the difficulty, and you name all the mechanics that are in the game. That's what she needed before she could go to the books and the podcast. We don't take in information the same way. And I don't know if that's because chauvinistically, that's because it's a male female thing, or if it's an engineering thing versus non-engineering. I don't know what it was. But because of the game, she was willing to then listen to some of the audio books that I had. Once she started to hear it from somebody else's point of view about what it was, then she had questions, and sometimes she would get upset about the things that she was hearing about. And then you combine that with, once we went full time also with the company, we were actually going out to places like Bitcoin Park and meetups and trying to actually talk to Bitcoiners. So talking to people plus the game, that's where it opened her up to, okay, what is this thing? And she didn't jump all the way in there and say, oh, I saw the light and now I'm laser eyed and this is going to cure everything. She just was just asking questions, and then she would ask more questions, and she'd ask more questions. She just kept asking questions. And then eventually she said, okay, I get it. And she's like, yeah, I get it. Bitcoin makes a lot of sense now. And then later on, what happened is she got into, hey, where are the rest of the women in this thing? Why is it so dominant for just men in the space? And then that led to a whole separate thing for her to go down the Orange Hatter path. But the game was the key that opened her up to, hey, okay, now I know what you're talking about because at least I have something I can visualize that wasn't just this something that was only conceptual.
So the game is quite a good way to orange pull family members. But do you have to know something about Bitcoin to play the game?
No, no, actually, that's actually the benefit is you don't have to know it. You can sit down and play it purely as a game. So I don't know if you play Catan or not, but it's about that level of difficulty. So it's a mix of strategy and luck, and it takes about 45 minutes to play. Once you know, that's it. You can sit down, play the game, and never say a word about what Bitcoin is because my intent with the game was I wanted it to be fun. The cash flow game, for example, I mentioned earlier, we force our kids to do that, and that was really sorry for
It's okay.
the noises there. That was good in terms of what it could teach, but it was really boring. It was really hard to get them to do it. So I just wanted a game that would be fun by itself. So that's what the mechanics needed to do. On the Bitcoin side, though, because I used everything in the game based on some mechanic, or the mechanics were based on something in Bitcoin. If you do want to teach someone, and I've got a list a mile long of the things that I can teach you using the game in a simplified format to say, here's a transaction, here's a halving, here's how one block is linked to the last block, and I can just go through this list of hot and cold wallets, attacks, everything. It just had a lot of room in there to have some fun if you want to teach. But it's actually great because you don't need to say a word about Bitcoin. You don't need to know anything at all about Bitcoin to just play the game.
Huh, that's really good to know. I saw you on the X and I'm like, oh, I want to interview Scott. And I thought my family love games, but they don't love Bitcoin. So this would be a good opportunity to play a game with everybody and
Yeah,
maybe get something started. And I'm sure a lot of people could use it for that.
that's a great reason to get it. There's actually You're in Miami. There's people in Miami that have the game. You can go test it out with some people in your area.
Cool. Wow. Well, while we're on game, I know that you're quite big into game theory. Tell us how it relates to Bitcoin.
Well, whether you believe Satoshi was an individual or a group, he's a genius. I mean, or he's just incredibly lucky to come up with something that on so many levels works together. So the technology itself, obviously, the coding is way above my pay grade and how he did that. If you just look at it from the game theory side, though, answering the questions of how you're going to create something that doesn't have an owner, doesn't have a one person in control over it, that it could be corrupted or could give into temptation, like a government, but also something that could be robust enough that it could actually be a store of value. And then if you just think about how complex that is, there's just layers of complexity. And the thing about game theory is at the end of the day, it's individual incentives. Who are the players and what are their incentives? They're in every way, the incentives are this self-reinforcing type of mechanism. It's just fascinating. So maybe you're an energy person and you're interested in mining and how those two things come together. But for us, it's education. So Tali and I will talk about separation of education and state. We'll talk about self-custody education. We'll talk a lot about education and make all these analogies. But every time I talk to somebody in a different area, they'll say the same thing about how Bitcoin relates to them. It's decentralized medicine, or it's decentralized, fill in the blank. So the game theory of how it works, you look at the game theory of the issuance schedule. You look at the game theory of people being attracted to it for one reason, but then they might get burned by it, but they're going to eventually learn like how it like the why it is what it is, and then they'll have their own experience. And so it was just one thing after another that were all solved together. It's sort of like the human body has all these different systems in it, right? And you have your nervous system is different than your respiratory system. It's just, I mean, your muscular system, they're all different, but they all work together. And that's what the way I look at it. Bitcoin is every one of these areas by itself would have been really, really hard to figure out. And he put them all together in this thing. And it can run on its own now. So we're at, I mean, I don't know the last time that, I mean, I know he had to make a change shortly after he launched it, but for the most part, you have no downtime for 15 years on this thing that's growing as this global asset. That's just fascinating from a game theory standpoint. If you set out and said, okay, Paula, I want to create digital gold that can't be corrupted. Like, where would you even start? Right? Never mind this, look forward, pull step backwards thing. So I just find that all fascinating. I think there's like little Easter eggs in it too. So the fact that the halving is every 4 years, and it just happens to be in the same year that we have elections in the United States, I think that's funny. Like, I just think that's funny, and I can't help but wonder how many things that he designed were intentional with with that. So now you're into geopolitical theory, right? And then there's the adoption theory, and then there was the the harder technical things like the general what do you call the Byzantine generals problem. It's just so many layers of game theory on this thing that whatever your area is, you can spend a whole lifetime on it. I mean, it's just fascinating to me that, and the question is, did he know all that, or did he just design this thing and he happened to get that one thing right, and now these other things, it just happens to work, right? Where the incentives are reinforcing and this thing continues to grow. Anyway, so yeah, I went on a tangent there. I don't even remember what your original question was.
It is quite amazing, right? It would so fascinating to know if he knew how much impact he would have, or if he just solved the money. Did he
Yeah,
just solve the money problem?
right. And then I mean, there's so many nuggets when he made the comment, "We're too early," because it was being used with, oh, it was WikiLeaks. I forget which one it was, but it was basically, he said we're too early. Well, to understand that in the beginning the system, yeah, you need the network effect, but it's most fragile in the early stages. Just like Nostr is going to be the most vulnerable now communication, but in 5 or 10 or 15 years, once it's built out, you'll be past that point of no return. So it feels that way. At least a lot of Bitcoiners feel we've passed that point of no return where nobody can pull it back in. Now we're up to geopolitical level where countries are going to start to, it's Brazil or it's going to be the U.S. and now or Russia or China or whoever's going to start to do this strategic reserve strategy. And then you've got companies that are doing it like MicroStrategy, and you've got just large institutional players that are doing it. And then you get into individuals, and you get into the minor. We've passed that point. But did he understand when he made that comment? We're too early. Where are we? Sometimes you'll hear Bitcoiners. They just want the green candle now. They want everything to go. And I can't help but to think that I think his advice still stands. I don't think we want this mega bull run. Just let's keep on developing and getting stronger, right? Like, be careful what you ask for. would be my thought. But yeah, I don't know if he knew that or if it was he just was fortunate that he got lucky or he had really good advisors. That could be another thing. If it was a group of people who were the people that influenced him in that. If you look at it from a libertarian standpoint, Austrian economic standpoint, there are a lot of other groups that will point to things in that structure and then they identify with it. And they're like, oh yeah, Satoshi obviously understood Austrian economics. Okay, well, Satoshi obviously understood energy. Satoshi
Right?
obviously understood all. Like, well, how many things could he have understood? Right? I don't know. This is a really smart guy. I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating, and I'm
Yeah.
glad we don't know who he is. I'm
Yeah.
very grateful that we have no idea.
Yeah, me too. So, of those things you mentioned, what do you think are the most important? The proof of work, the way that we reward miners?
I think it's a system. It works together. It's like, is your left hand more important than your right hand, or is the brain more important than the heart? I think you need to have that link to energy. You had to have that digital to physical link. That's absolutely critical to the security of it. So that's pretty amazing. One of the things that I thought was very weird the first time I looked at it, but then the more I studied it, the more I thought it was brilliant, and that was the difficulty adjustment, because you needed to have an anti-fragile type of system if this was going to continue. So there's no way you're going to be able to predict the future and say, well, China's going to have the supply chain locked up, and they're going to have all the miners, and then they're going to take them offline. They're going to make it illegal to use Bitcoin or mine Bitcoin. So you could have supply chain shocks. You could have the other way too. You could have a green candle effect where everybody's trying to get into it at once. Maybe you develop a new chip that's 10 times as fast as the last one, and I don't know. So there's all kinds of things. So the difficulty adjustment to me is just this self-regulating. It's what do you call it? It's almost like a pacemaker, right? So that as we speed up, it's going to slow us down, and vice versa. And I just thought it's brilliantly simple. Einstein had the E equals MC squared. How do you take this really complex thing and make it simple? Okay, so here's this really complex thing. You have to deal with the market and computers doubling their speed every 18 months, getting to Moore's law kind of thing. You can go down that path, or you can just say, well, we're just going to build in a feature in this thing that it regulates itself. And every 2016 blocks, it's either going to go up or down by a percentage. So the worst that you could have is is a 2-week period where someone has an advantage or a disadvantage because there was a disruption. I just think that's amazing. Like, talk about anti-fragile. You don't need a whole board of governors. You don't need a whole bunch of investment bankers. You don't need a central bank to say, is it time to change? No. Like the transaction fees, it's going to be a free market in terms of what those are. The who's going to be mining and not mining based on energy prices, free market. It just works. Anyway, so I think that's one of the pieces that I find to be really, really interesting, in that it sounds so simple now. Why didn't anybody else think of it? Like, it's right. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to think about. That's one of the reasons I have it in the game too, is that I really wanted to have that concept somehow in a simplified format. So the difficulty adjustment in the game will actually, if players are getting the blocks too fast, it actually does get harder to slow you down, and vice versa. If the game's just taking too long, then that portion will get easier and easier and easier. So it's a really cool concept.
Wow, it sounds like you're pretty smart to figure that out too.
I don't know about that. It's a lot of play testing.
You say that it's really simple, and yes, the most simple things are the most profound, but it's really quite hard to explain to people.
Yes, I agree with you. And that is a struggle, and especially when other people have other incentives to. If you can get rich quick by just leveraging, say, I just want to say the words DeFi, or say the words crypto, or say whatever, blockchain. I want to use those words, but I'm going to use that to go and get what I want, which is I want to do, you want to pull like an FTX type of thing or something. I mean, you can't stop anybody there is nobody to stop others from using the technology or using the words or anything else. Yeah, so it's on us. The proof of work will be on us as those who understand it, to help teach other people.
And that's what we're doing, and that's what you're doing with your games. Do you think so? You mentioned that nation states building strategic reserves, and that's part of the game theory, right? The rush to get more Bitcoin. Do you think that MicroStrategy and certain nation states getting too much can be a centralizing factor on Bitcoin?
I mean, I guess yeah. Tali and I were actually just talking about this. I mean, if you were, and this is what when you get into the issuance schedule, that most of the Bitcoin has already been, that's ever going to exist, has already been mined. It's already out there. However, certain people may have a buying price, or a sell price rather. So you've been hodling, but your dream. I mean, why do you have Bitcoin? Is it because of the Bitcoin itself, or is it what you can do with it? So if you have a dream and you really want to have a house, or you want to get married, or you want to, whatever you want to start a business, and you're an early investor, you were hodling Bitcoin, and you get to a point where you can achieve your dreams. So what is the point of continuing to hodl and giving those up? So, and then you get people who are just in a bad situation. You may have hodled, and now the economy is so bad, you're in a you're in a bad spot. So when it comes to a BlackRock or somebody else who, especially when you're close to the government and they can just print money, they can buy Bitcoin with printed dollars. You and I want to get Bitcoin. We're either mining it ourselves or we're going to buy it. But either way, we have to have the capital. We have to have, it's our money that we're going to put into it. So I dislike seeing the large players like that come in and be able to take, and look what the ETFs have done. And does that become a threat vector for Bitcoin? Because then what they potentially could do is just say, well, we're going to issue, here's the US dollar. It's now pegged to Bitcoin. Could they then do the equivalent of doing a fractional banking system based on that as a layer? I don't know. I think that if you're one of those banks and the price goes up, or from my point of view, it's more of the Jeff Booth thing where everything's getting priced in Bitcoin. It's actually the dollar going down. But at some point, the purchasing power of that's immense. How long do they keep it? Like, what's the point? What's the point in doing that? And if they are going to use it, what are they going to use it for? What are their objectives that they're holding out for? Then at some point, it should flow to others. So I don't have a definitive answer in terms of how big that threat is, but I can't stop anybody from buying Bitcoin. I can't stop anybody from mining it. I can't stop anybody from sending transactions to each other. That's the beautiful part of it, right? That was the intent of it. On the other hand, some people who can print money or who are close to the people who print money, I just find it disturbing. The other choice is we never get big enough. So imagine that Bitcoin has succeeded. Let's do the game theory thing. Bitcoin is now the global store of value, medium of exchange. It's the unit of account for the whole world. We get to the full money thing. Well, in order to get there, that means the assets in the world are going to have to be priced in Bitcoin, right? You can't get there without eventually having governments and eventually having the big banks and the big corporations. You can't get to the dream without eventually having to go and include them. So we're going to have a lot of volatility going through that. And I look at that as a good thing because it means that we're on our way to the bigger picture. The alternative is, that's like saying you're afraid of aging. Well, if you don't age, then you're going to die, right? Because you don't have a choice, right? You're going to have to go through this growth period. We have to go through a growth period that includes the people or entities that we otherwise really don't really like that much. The governments are going to eventually get there. You're going to have these large banks and large corporations. We have to eventually have them to get to the ultimate dream. So I'd rather that we're going to go through growing pains, knowing that we're growing and that there's a better future, than we can't get enough adoption that anybody cares enough to even get on the radar. Right? That would be really disheartening. That would be horrible. The fact that we're going down this path tells me that Bitcoin is going to continue to grow. All those incentives we were just talking about, they're working. They're just working at higher levels now. And we just have to accept the volatility and that it's not necessarily going to be a smooth ride. But it's better than the alternative that we're never big enough that we're even on the radar.
While you were speaking, I was just thinking, Jeff Booth says we are all one. What he means by that is that the people in government are also going to eventually do the right thing and see that this is a better protocol, because all fiat has failed and most likely will continue to fail based on what people do in governments with printing.
Yeah, he's a deep thinker.
I know.
I can't even. I'm not going to try to top him. I agree. They'll see it. Although I don't know if they'll see it for the right reasons up front. They might come into it thinking they're going to get one thing, and then Bitcoin has this really cool track record of kind of humbling people. So I don't see why it can't humble these entities that we're talking about as well.
Yeah. How do you think Bitcoin changes humanity?
So a couple things on that. The first big thing that I think it does is the idea of, this is the first time ever that we have a money that cannot be corrupted, that cannot be inflated, that cannot be that's a completely, this is like, okay, before and after flight or before and after telegraph or before and after fire. Like this we are in uncharted territory for as humans to do that. And what has happened with wars and with education and the medical system, and just go down the list of things where, because of our fiat system, it allows and encourages exactly the system that we have today. So you want to say, hey, Scott, I think Washington is broken. Or you could say, or it's exactly what you would expect for the system that was designed. The monstrosity clown world that we have is exactly what the system was designed to do, right? And so the first layer to me is you starve the beast of what it needs in order to do all these other things. So I'm upset about education. Okay, let's starve the beast of what it can do with education. What it's done with big farm and just big food, like the whole food thing. I don't know if you've gone down that rabbit hole or not, and follow some of the RFK stuff. So there's the way that we can get all those things healthier again is to starve the beast with the money. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think what comes with that is people will lower their time preference, because with sound money, now we can get to the point where the interest rates and the market and other things can be based on sound money, so you can make better decisions. Right now, no one knows how to gauge that because the system's so corrupt. Oh my God, dog. So in other words, there's going to be a profound impact on people's individual lives. And so for me personally, maybe I'm just projecting, but as I was studying Bitcoin, then I was studying the money and the history of money, and then that led to the Austrian economics, that led to low time preference. You fast forward 2 years, and now I think about sleep, reducing alcohol, but alcohol, diet, meditation, just all my whole view on things has changed on a very, very personal level. And I think there'll be a very profound shift for the better as individuals go back to a lower time preference. That to me is a whole, the human potential that can be opened up with that is just incredible. And so those are the two ways. One is to starve the beast of the system that we've already, like we're nearing the end of whatever this monstrosity is, this experiment with central banking. But then what it's going to do for individual lives and how it's going to impact people individually, I think that is just going to be incredible. I think that we just haven't. One thing is to stop the pain. The other one is allow the human potential to really blossom and human flourishing to really, really grow. And that may take a while to get there. This might take 2, 3, or 4 decades before it gets there, but it gives me a lot of hope that that's what I think the impact of Bitcoin will have in the longer term.
Even people that adopt it later will still benefit.
Oh yeah.
I have a harder time seeing that. I always want everyone to get in now.
Yes, it is hard to see, but ultimately, I do think it'll be better, and there'll be cases where people, if it's not perfect. If someone attacks somebody else, okay, then that doesn't take away what happened to that individual. But I'm just talking about population as a whole. Humans as a whole will be better. We will be better off than we would be if we continued down this centralized fiat type of system that we're in. I think if we didn't have Bitcoin, we would be living the George Orwell 1984. Right? The technologies we have now are a totalitarianist. I don't know how to say that. If you are a statist, technology is a dream, because if you look at what they can do in China to control people, like that type of George Orwell future, that's very possible. CBDCs, very possible, if you didn't have Bitcoin. I'd actually have hope in those two things we just talked about. If we didn't have that, I would be pretty depressed, because I don't know how you would fight this. I don't know how you would fight if you are a statist and you have all the technology you need to control what you're allowed to say, who educates your kids, what you can eat or not eat. Once I can control all of that, and I can't, you can't even meet with other people and express your ideas. So I have locked that in for however, forever. So I think Bitcoin is really the way to break that. That's the only thing I see that actually works and has enough network effects now that it can't be stopped. So it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that often. Bitcoin gave me a lot of hope, gives a lot of people a lot of hope. It also reminds me that it's much easier to fund wars with fiat, and that's hopeful, right? We're not going to want to print money to fund wars as much.
That was one of the hardest things I had to learn, because I grew up when I was in elementary school, you did the Pledge of Allegiance. And I went to the Army, and of course at West Point. Everything was very patriotic. It was all, and then to find out that World War I, World War II, all the endless wars that we've had for the last 4 or 5 decades. If you look at how the money has enabled that, at first I didn't even want to believe it. I was like, that amount of suffering, never mind like to buildings and the economic damage. Think about the people who went through horrible traumas. They were either injured or died or were killed. Those families are decimated. The amount of human suffering, unnecessary suffering, it's just unimaginable that someone said, yeah, that's okay because we get to keep power. So we're going to keep on funding these wars. I had a very hard time accepting it, but once I got it, then I was all the more encouraged to say, am I going to go back to a fiat job, or am I going to go and stand up and do something that I think is right? Am I going to be part of the future I want to see? And starting a business is not easy. And you're starting your podcast. I forget what episode number you're up to. I apologize, but it's hard. It's hard work to get things going. But when you have a bigger purpose in mind, when you have a bigger idea in mind, and I think about the education for kids, the education for vets, Tali's obviously trying to help with education for women. This is a cause way bigger than ourselves, way, way, way bigger than ourselves. And if we can successfully stop future wars that you were just talking about, because we're able to educate people and because we're able to implement Bitcoin into companies and families and the government, it is worth it. It is worth it to do that. And having that purpose is very fulfilling for me. When I was in the fiat job, I didn't care. Okay, yeah, you want the company to make money. Yay, team, right? But it just didn't, there was no mission there for me. Now there's a mission way bigger than ourselves. The next generation depends on this, and like our own kids, but you look at literally the humankind, the potential. We have a choice. We can either help this and make things better in the future and contribute to that, or you can look in the mirror and say, yeah, I never stood up and I never took a stand. I never tried. I never had the courage to take that first step to start a business. I didn't try to teach somebody else. I didn't try to, whatever it is that your first step is. You don't all have to be Michael Saylors, right? You just need individuals to say, yeah, I'm going to DCA, or I'm going to actually study what low time preference means, and maybe I'm going to cut down on all these artificial drinks and exercise more. Like, okay, then good. Medical costs will be lower. Maybe that person, they have more time for something else that also helps others. The compound effects of everybody doing small steps is huge. So anyway, yeah, it is something way bigger than ourselves, and that is so fulfilling. And if you want to talk about things that are hard to communicate to people, someone says, "What do you think Bitcoin is? Should I buy some?" And I'm like, I just want to shake my head. And I said, "Well, I think you need to just start with education. Just start educating yourself. I don't care if you buy it or not. I think you should, but I don't think that's the right question. I think you should be. I think you should start to educate yourself. That's what's going to be valuable for your life is those lessons. And that's not what people are not. I say all people. A lot of people are coming into it for that quick buck type of mentality. And I don't know. I'll answer their question, but I just want to scream that they're not asking the right question. Not asking the right question, guy. There's a much bigger thing out here, and it's so amazing. Then it gives me what I like though is that I do think that based on all the other people, all the other testimonies I've heard, a lot of people come in that way, and then they go through whatever hard time they go through, and then some portion of those people actually take the time to learn, and then they really get it because they went through the pain and they really really get it, and then they don't go back, right? So you learn it, you don't unlearn what you see, right? And now somebody else over time, some more come in, they don't unlearn it, and so the adoption curve might still be early, but it's unstoppable, right? It's only at some point we're gonna get to that critical mass, and it'll shoot up. But you got to have courage you have to take that first step, and if you do that, the world will open up to you.
Yeah, so many good points. What do you think is the right question?
But the right question would be, if someone had enough insight to ask this, they probably already would have done it. But it's, what resources do you recommend to learn? Those would be the right questions to me, because I don't need to educate you. If I can teach you how to self-educate, it's the same with the kids, right? If I teach the kids to read, they have a superpower now with the internet. They can learn anything, right? They can plug into any language, any video, any subject, anywhere, anytime. That's pretty astounding. If you just need to start, though, what are the things that you need to start? And there's so much noise out there. There's so much FUD out there, and there's so many people who have other motives. The state is going to fight to the death on this. The people in power, the people who have made a lot of money this way, the people who have been brainwashed by the indoctrination of the schools and things like that, they will fight to the death on this. So if you are new, the right question to ask is, hey, I need a little help so I know the right path to take, right? So that would be the right question to ask. What resources helped you, depending on what your interests are? If you're doing human rights things because you're helping people, you're helping freedom fighters in a country, you probably need different resources than if you're someone maybe in the US and you have just a different circumstance. So what you need to learn might be different, but you need to learn, and you need to learn how to learn. And it depends on where you are on your journey. I can tell you, hey, this is where I started. But if you're in a different spot, that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really help you. So, but if you're not learning, that's bad. Like if you are not learning something new, if you're not trying to figure things out and solving these things that don't make sense to you, that's the flag. But if you're trying to learn, then the question you would ask is, how do I learn faster? How do I learn the thing that's going to be more impactful? How do I learn something that helps me learn other things faster? That's a superpower. And if you can teach someone that, whoo, man, you don't have to give them a whole course. You just have to get them started, and they'll be on their way.
Yeah, teaching a man to fish. And
Yes.
the other question that I was thinking is, well, why do I need Bitcoin, or why do we need Bitcoin? That's a question not everybody even knows to ask, like you said.
Yeah, I feel like we covered that though. I think that
Yeah.
we if we want to have a better future for ourselves and our kids, we have to stop the fiat system we have. We have to. I mean, there's a lot of pain and suffering that we're gonna go through because of that system. And you can unlock all the potential for yourself once you actually learn these principles and start to apply them. Right? You can truly unlock that to avoid some of the bad things that we already have, and to have the potential to enjoy these asymmetric upside type of opportunities. Those would be the reasons that you should have some. And if that's how you learn, some people just need to buy some and learn that way. That's still kind of the education piece, though. The reason you should do it is it's going to make you happier. When you figure these things out, you're going to be pissed off about what you learned. You'll be like, how come I can't believe someone would do this to another human being? And you're going to like say, okay, but that's what it is. What can I do for myself? What can I do for my family? What can I do for my community? And that's where you take your first steps. So I would say do it for yourself. It's, some people get into the incentive of greed. We get into the incentives of Bitcoin. Good. Like, that's good. Like the fact that you might be better off if you get some, good. I'd be happy for you. So it's not only okay, it's actually moral to be self-interested. You should, if someone asks you that question, you could just say, well, just be selfish. This is something that will make your life better in whatever way you define better, if you study it than if you don't.
Yeah, makes sense. So just tell us a little bit about your education and your books and your companies.
Okay, so for Market Kids, we've started with the games. We have 4 games out now with different variations of the HODL Up. So HODL Up is the Bitcoin game we discussed earlier. It's all based on layer 1. I have a book that goes with it where there was too much to put into the game, so I just put all my notes together into a book. Then I have the this is really hard. I'm really trying. Then we have a lightning game called Channel Up. We have a seed phrase game called BIP 39, named after the BIP 39. I'm working on a game for next year called Fed Up that is going to be focused on fiat clown world. So the goal is every year I put out another first principle type of games. Talia is working on some early reader series. So imagine you're talking to 6 or 7-year-old. They're just starting to read one sentence at a time type of thing. And instead of telling you, hey, Paula, here's inflation and here's money and here's this, that basically tries to take a lesson plan and disguise it with a cartoon because kids can smell it out. So she has a couple books and a journal that goes with them where she introduces things like inflation because the kid wants to replace the flower vase that he broke. It's a mom's flower vase. When when he goes to the store, the price is 15 instead of 10, right? And so she's doing some early reader series types of things. Bitcoin Homeschoolers podcast, our goal with that is we think that homeschoolers are Bitcoiners that just don't know it yet because the values are so aligned. But when we've gone to homeschooling conferences, there are multiple things that they're working through, trying to understand all the things like you and I just walk through. Whereas I go to the Bitcoiners and I say, you should self-custody your education, they get it really fast. So Bitcoin Homeschoolers podcast is meant to help people who want to be parents or early parents that are new to homeschooling. We're just going to say, okay, here's our 20 years of experience, and we're going to share it with the Bitcoin community, bring on some other Bitcoin homeschooling families in the process. So that's where we're just trying to share lessons. And then Operation Bitcoin, I'm on the board for that. That is to help veterans. So we want to help with training. We want to help with understanding the same things we just walked through. It doesn't matter if it's kids or vets, if it's understanding money and understanding Bitcoin. But what we want to do is we want to grow that so that we can offer more sophisticated training. So if you're in transition out of the military and you learn how to repair mining, a miner, for example, or something, or eventually get to the point where those vets can actually go and start companies. So what we'd like to do is more than just a job placement type of thing, but we want to grow that beyond education. We're starting with education because that's just the first step. And so that's pretty exciting because, again, it has a purpose to it that I can kind of
Yeah, well, and I love that we end with purpose because without purpose, life doesn't have as much meaning. So Bitcoin has given all of us a lot of purpose, and what wonderful education tools that you have, and for veterans too. I will put links to all below.
Great. I'll send those to you right after because we've gone through a few, so I'll give you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.